Hello and welcome to the Three Skinners. My name is JJ.
And my name is David. And we are also missing our third member tonight, Isaac. He's on his holidays at the minute, so I'm sure he'd say hello in his wacky, normal way. But instead of Isaac, we have got a very, very special guest tonight. We have got the one and only Mr. Duane Fraser. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Duane Fraser. He is Wulgurukaba and Bidjara traditional owner.
I can't wait until he corrects this.
And has extensive experience advising Commonwealth and State Governments on matters relating to Indigenous affairs and environmental policy. Mr. Fraser enjoys a diverse national and global network that includes high-level influencers, current and ex-politicians from both major parties, senior executives, and grassroots communities. He uses his profile to create positive change and impact to ensure traditional owners are given the opportunity for full and effective participation and leadership roles at all levels of decision making in political, economic and public life. Economic, thank you. Mr. Fraser has presented at numerous international fora on the advancement of Indigenous peoples of the world and their empowerment in the protection and safeguarding of their delicate biocultural land and seascapes, heritage and cultural expressions. Currently chair the Federal Minister for the Environment's Indigenous Advisory Committee, also known as the IAC. Mr. Fraser serves on several high-level boards, including the Great Barrier Reef, Marine Park Authority, elected councillor of the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Studies, and more recently, Tourism and Events Queensland, to name a few. Welcome, Mr. Fraser.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, JJ. And just for the record, Wulgurukaba and Bidjara, but that's fine, mate. We'll forgive you because you're from England.
Yeah, there we go. Do you know what? I get, JJ and Isaac give me a lot harder time for just talking normally.
For just existing most things.
Mate, thank you very much for coming on. We've talked about you a few times. I've been very excited to get you on, and I know the lads have as well. Yeah. So welcome to the show.
Dwayne's a very good friend of ours. We have spent many a weekend together, and it's mental to think about how much you've achieved in life compared to anyone else that I know. Those titles are obscene, but that's what we're going to get into later on. Just everything that you're about, because Duane, we've said it on this before. I said it. Anyone that I meet and tell them about you, you're one of the most interesting and diverse people that I know, but also one of the nicest and kindest men I've ever met in my life. And I think I'm very much looking forward to getting to that. But before we do that, how good are you at dancing, Duane? How good are you at dancing? I know this answer.
I've been known to twerk, yeah.
Yeah, you have. It's time to get on the beers.
Rapidly get on the beers. That's just civic duty. That's what's most important. And that's what must be done. Beers. Get on the beers. And that's what must be done.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's my exercise for today.
Exhilarating.
I've just closed a ring on my Apple Watch.
Okay, so what we do every week, Duane, is that we go through and see what everyone's drinking. Since you're the guest, you can go first. What have you got?
Cheers. Well, I know the tradition generally is to have a beer, although I am Duane Fraser and I am on Megan Collins, so I'll be having a margarita.
He loves
Very
them.
Lovely. What have you got, Dave?
So I've got a lovely little beer from a brewery called Green Beacon, who are located in Brisbane. We've just done an event recently down at the bar, which was a tap takeover. So I've got Green Beacon, it was backwards there, but it is actually Windjammer Indian Pale Ale. So it's an IPA. I've had it already. It's pretty nice. So I'm going to tuck into that one. Very good beer. Check out, if you're a beer enthusiast, check out Green Beacon. They're a very good brewery.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Nice,
there you go.
nice. I went for my usual Carlton draft this week. Thank goodness.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's another Desperado. Thank you.
So just so you know, Duane, he's been doing this joke for, well, it's over a year now because we had our birthday episode the other day. So he pretends that he hasn't got any Desperados. Then he magically pulls one out and it's just hilarious every time we record.
I can see how you find that hilarious, Steve.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm
Understanding the threshold of comedy that exists within your body, I can see why you continuously find that funny. Yeah.
Splitting at the sides, some would say. So yeah, that's JJ's sense of humour.
I don't know why you're being like that, Dave. I mean, let's be honest, right? It's better than most things that we do. I love pulling out the Desperado and everyone's just like, right, it's a good moment. It's a good moment to have. And the Desperado's moment's great, and I will never let it go. We also discovered he had a soundboard in the last episode, which was great fun. Excellent. Anywho, Duane, I've known you for Dave is also. Oh, cheers! First of all, boys.
Cheers. Cheers.
Sorry about that. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
I've known you for a couple of years now. You're an absolutely amazing young man. So I know you from St Kilda, but you're not from St Kilda, are you?
No, I'm not.
No, you're not. Where are you from?
So my mother's family are from North Queensland, where I grew up on Magnetic Island, which for those of you who don't know is a little tropical island just off Townsville inside the Great Barrier Reef. But I was born in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory and spent the first couple of years of my childhood in a place called Tennant Creek, which is about 560 kilometres north of Alice Springs, and kind of in the middle of the desert and a long way from anything that has any level of progress.
Lovely. Yep. And when did you end up going across to Magnetic, which is where Dave lives now?
Yeah, which is where Dave. And, you know, although I didn't consent to him moving here, he's still here. So my mum, strangely, was visiting the Northern Territory where my grandmother was working at the time in Tennant. My nana was a health administrator and she was the CEO of an Aboriginal organisation called Anyaningi. And Anyaningi is a pretty big health service in Central Australia. It's still operational. It's been going for quite a while. Nana was the inaugural CEO there. So mum was over there for school holidays, I believe, met this strapping young man who looks like me but older, Duane Fraser Sr., and they fell in love. They produced myself. 3 years later, although they're quite young, decided that the relationship wasn't working. My mother moved back to her mother's country here in Queensland. So probably I was 3, so 20 years ago. Nice.
And I've not had the pleasure of going to Magnetic Island yet. Hopefully I get your permission to go there. But
if not, I know the back ways if you need to know.
We're an island. There's only one way, mate.
I don't know. It depends how good you are digging from Alaska. Dave and everyone that's been there tells me it's absolutely beautiful. It's somewhere that everyone has to go. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Out of curiosity, Duane, what is the traditional name for Magnetic Island?
So our people call Maggie Island Yumbanan.
Yumbanan. Okay.
Yumbanan. Yeah, it's a place name.
And does that have like a meaning behind it? Does it mean anything, or
it's the place? It's the place name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Cool.
And you mentioned your mum. You and your mum, I know that unfortunately your mum's passed away now. I've never heard in my life anyone speak about their mum the way that you speak about your mum. And it is just, it's the most wholesome and pure thing I've ever heard in my whole life. She seemed like an amazing woman. I never got to meet her, but everything that you've told me about her seems like, you know, I missed out. I really did. Can you tell us a little bit about your mum then?
Sure. And yeah, we're almost 12 months. October 12, she passed last year. So essentially, and we'll probably get into it a little bit later when we talk a bit more about my work, I got into this space because my mother had carved within the Australian political landscape, a space for Indigenous Australians to speak and advocate for their country, for their place. For example, Wulgurukaba, Townsville, Magna and many others all over the country. She was the product of two, kind of well-established community leaders in her parents, who at a very young age realised that she had a calling to dedicate her life to the protection and conservation of both our land and our culture. And she did that quite selflessly. She raised me for the most part as a single mother, later meeting my stepfather and producing two beautiful children in my siblings. And work was very much a part of who she was. And she gave her time to anyone who needed it, mentored many, changed the mindsets of those who thought their minds would never be changed, including pretty hardcore conservatives in Australia. So she was an incredible human being who not just influenced my life, but gave her time and dedication, and dedicated her time to creating a better outcome for everyone.
That's
inspirational.
That just sounds lovely, and obviously you followed in her footsteps, and you've now ended up on a few boards. I think a few boards is putting it lightly, I reckon.
Which most recently was the tourism and events for Queensland. I mean, that's pretty big deal, pretty big job as well, given the current circumstances. But all roads have led to this path. How did you? Obviously, your mother was a big inspiration, but how does a man of your stature find yourself headed? It's not a path many people head down, when you've became pretty established in what you do. So how did the road take you to where you are now?
Look, I'll be honest. Growing up in the house of an environmentalist, a black environmentalist at that, which automatically makes them more practical and better looking. I never wanted to work in the environment space. Right from the beginning, I made it very clear that my path was either in the Defence Force or I was going to become a merchant banker. I wanted to be rich with lots of houses and extra cars. It didn't work out that way. I'm a poor environmentalist, black, of course, because that makes it we're more effective and better looking. I realised pretty early that there was no way I was avoiding what was destined to be my career, and it's more of a lifestyle than anything. You go down this path because you see that there is a gap in the community that requires someone to dedicate their time to working towards resolving particular issues. When you grow up on the Great Barrier Reef, you see at times degradation of coral cover, the declining reef health, and you think, I need to do something about protecting my country, and in so also protecting my people's spiritual relationship with the reef. So I kind of accepted that I was destined to go down that path and did so.
I find that something fascinating with the First Nation community of Australia. As I was traveling around Australia, I did a road trip from Melbourne to Perth, and obviously you encounter a lot of the history along the way. I went to Aboriginal sites and stuff like that, and the connection that the First Nation people have with the land is... It's pretty eye-opening. It's not something I've seen before coming from England and all that. And even like the painting you've got, which I'm actually interested to talk about, but the painting you've got behind you, that sort of artwork, and that is stuff I've found as I traveled across Australia. And I remember going to like this cave system, and they talked about the Aboriginal history of this cave system, and they go there and it was very like almost shamanistic in a way. It was talking about the spirits, the water, the stuff like that. It was pretty inspirational versus growing up in England where we don't really have anything like that. So I just found it fascinating that the connection that First Nations in Australia have with the land. And obviously, I imagine, the paintings and stuff like that, there's some sort of connection there.
So, I mean, there's a few things that I should probably point out to begin with. We are talking about a population of people who were isolated in one landscape for close to 80,000 years. So when a civilization spend that long in one place, their understanding of that particular landscape, the biodiversity that exists there, the flora, fauna, and so on and so forth, you're bound to develop an understanding of that particular place. What is interesting, though, is most people kind of look at Indigenous culture and Indigenous society as hunter-gatherers. Well, in recent times, the research and evidence suggests that actually the systems that Indigenous Australians used to manage and interact with land were quite complex. There was agriculture, aquaculture, these kind of industries that existed. But what didn't occur, like it happens in other countries, developed places like England, we didn't industrialise systems to expand populations. There was an understanding for a long time that our relationship to place had to be one that was sustainable and one that was in harmony and not separate from the environment. I think that's probably an important point to make. This painting behind me is a landscape painting, an aerial view in the eyes of the artist. So the particular artist who's now passed, so I won't say their name, painted from their vision what their country looked like: water holes, walking tracks, eating areas, river systems. So if you were to look at that painting, you would potentially use that as a map if you had an understanding of the landscape.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy. But what I find a lot with this art, which I find fascinating, is the colours that they use as well. It's all these real earthy tones and stuff like that.
So this is very much not a traditional collection of paints, right? But the artist in a contemporary context has used paints that for her kind of capture the landscape that she's painting. Traditionally, you're right, there would be very solid whites, browns, oranges, yellows, things that come from ochre, which is a rock that if you break down and add water, turns into a paste, which therefore becomes paint.
I was about to ask that, like, did these like the beginnings of the art in these cultures that came from obviously sourcing it from the land, so that's why.
I don't imagine you would get many blues then. Blue would be a really hard colour to come by.
No, you wouldn't get much blues unless you ate a lot of blueberries and passed blueberries for easy.
I mean, I knew it would be useful for something, and that would be it.
Although I don't think that you would find many blueberries natively in Australia.
No.
If you go to, so these are acrylic paints, by the way, you can tell because it's quite modern. But if you go to caves, Dave, you referred to some of them in your travel, and you see paintings on the wall. Those paintings are done with a rock that they've turned into a powder that they've added paste to put on the wall. And some of them are 16,000 plus years, some of them closer to 30,000 years old. And by the way, if we look at modern societies, if you, for example, England, and we think about timelines, I reckon Indigenous Australia probably have longer bowel movements than England has history.
Yeah, that's probably fair as well. But I found that fascinating when I was looking at this sort of art, and there I was, like, I was literally, as you described, in the middle of the desert, and I'm going to these old cave systems and whatnot, and you're seeing this art, and it was all protected and stuff like that. But you knew you were looking at something. It's not your bog standard tourist attraction. You're looking at something pretty spectacular. And
can you imagine if the case was that those paintings were done by the equivalent of today's graffiti artist? Like, it was just some guy running up and painting on a wall and running away, and he got into trouble for it. And yet, thousands of years later, we're like, genius, absolute genius.
Although I think that the consequence of rebellious behaviour back in more than 178, 200 years ago was probably a little bit harsher than that of a fine for graffitiing.
Although, I reckon so.
most of the cave rock art are quite considered pieces of art, and generally, generally particular members of community would give consent for those things to occur.
So they would actually commission it to happen.
Oh, in some way, yeah. So if you just north of here in a particular range on someone else's country, not my people's country, there is a burial site, and inside, so that the remains are placed in a cave, a very narrow and cave, but a cave in its own right. On the surface of that cave, about 1.5 meters, because you've got to crawl in there, there are paintings of shields that would have been kind of identifiers of that particular person. And below the shield is where the person is buried. It's like a tombstone of some sort.
So I imagine that the cave would have been dark. How would they have got light to do that?
So it's kind of, no, there's reasonable light in there.
Okay.
Because the front end is quite open, and you just crawl in and then you kind of look back over a dancing field. But yeah, that's just an example of how a lot of those paintings are considered. In some parts of Australia, you'll find rock art that depicts tall ships with large sails passing by.
Wow. So that would have went back to like the Dutch and the English and all that, yeah.
In the modern context, we would have put a big circle and a line for it saying, cancel culture, but it didn't work. if only Indigenous Australia figured out how to make muskets a little bit earlier.
A little bit earlier.
We reprioritised our attention.
Yeah.
On you go, Dave, sorry.
Oh, I was just interested in learning more about Magnetic Island, and obviously you said you obviously belong to the tribe. Is Townsville considered as part of that land, or is that a different tribe? Because Townsville's about it's 15 minutes on a ferry, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. So as the borders, well, look, the first point, Wulgurukaba, the name of our people, directly translates to saltwater canoe people. It's in the name. So our transport, it's be like you would be Dave, person of the bike, or whatever it is. I know you don't
David, person of the Scouser. Belongs to of Stephen Gerrard.
we would make and sail canoes. I mean, our border as it stands is from Rolling Stone Creek, which is just north of us, down to Ross River and out to the shelf of the Great Barrier and beyond. And noting that Maggie Island now is the largest island in our country. However, if you go back 10,000 years ago before the sea levels rose, the shelf was much further out before the reef even existed. The reef's only about 10,000 years old. Where the shelf was, there was a drop. And in between there, Palm Island, and here were about 300 more islands that are now underwater. So our people lived on the land where the reef is now, and as the water rose, we moved further inland to Maggie and Townsville.
So let's talk about that, because I find this absolutely fascinating. It's a place I'd like to see. I don't know, but neighbouring to Magnetic Island is Palm Island, isn't it? And through my understanding, that's predominantly an Aboriginal community island.
Yeah.
How far away? Sorry.
It's about 2 hours on the ferry. Or about 20 minutes if you fly. The Palm Island's about, I would say, it's 98+% Indigenous. Mainly black people live there. So our neighbouring tribe, the Mundra people, are the traditional owners of Palm Island. Palm Island's got a pretty complex history, though. The state government under the Aborigines Protection Act used Palm Island as a penal colony. And any troubled blacks or blacks who occupied land that the state wished to use for strategic purposes would be removed and sent to Palm Island. So there's actually although there is one traditional owner group whose country includes Palm, there are like 27 plus, maybe more. It's more than that. I've pulled that number out of the air. Language groups that exist on Palm, and they refer to themselves as the Bookerman people, which is a reference to the island.
That's crazy.
Mad, isn't it?
It is fascinating. And I didn't actually know that Magnetic Island was one of the biggest islands in Australia. I've only just learnt that now, which is fascinating.
Biggest islands in Australia.
Did you say that's
biggest island on our country in Wulgurukaba land?
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood.
I mean, surely that's Tasmania. That would be probably the biggest.
Surely that's Australia. Yeah.
But let's go back a little bit to where Dave said you're now on the board of the tourism board, of Queensland. What does that entail? Tell me more. Because I imagine there's going to be very soon a lot of people trying to come into Australia very, very shortly. How is that going to affect you?
Well, any spare time that I think I had would probably be consumed by that process. Tourism Events Queensland is an independent body. It's a government entity created to guide and promote Queensland's tourism and event space. Really, it's in the title. The State Minister appointed me to the board of that organisation only a few months ago, with the mandate to support the sector to get them out of the pandemic and the crisis that we sit in at the moment, with a focus on reef tourism. Although, without a doubt, I'll be required to provide support to move not just reef tourism, the sector as a whole, but also a cast and look at what the tourism industry looks like after COVID-19 and how Indigenous Australia can be involved in that sector at a rate that's increased from where it is now, which is not great. There are considered efforts, but it's not great.
But let's just discuss that topic that you bring up, is like reef tourism. What does that actually entail? Because from my understanding, the reef's not in the best shape. It's in a bit of trouble. Is that, obviously that's what's going on in the world and everything, but does tourism contribute, or does it damage the reef? How is reef tourism operated in a safe and practical manner?
I mean, that's a complex question. I can give it a red hot crack. The reef tourism space interact and access probably about 3% of the reef as a whole, and most of that tourism, about 80% of it, visit only about 1% of the reef.
Oh, right. Wow.
So the tourism itself is a minor impact on reef health. There are far larger impacts, and we could touch on them later, including your comment around whether the reef is doing well or not. I can provide you some recent data on that.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated on that. I will be.
Yeah, and so, I mean, reef tourism brings to the Queensland economy about $6.6 billion per year, and it employs close to 68,000 people. So it is a major contributor to the Queensland economy. But more than that, in terms of reef understanding and the understanding of management tools and what we need to do to protect the reef tourism is the number one tool for educating the public, not just domestically, but internationally. And of course, given the border restrictions at the moment, international tourism is an issue, but domestic tourism and Queenslanders visiting Queensland is on the rise, and this is a good thing for everyone.
And that's a thing that people won't understand, because we get quite a lot of listeners from the UK, and they won't understand because no one really in the UK goes on holiday within their own country because it's so small. Like, it's so small. It's 400 miles from Glasgow to London. I think the whole stretch is like 650 miles from top to toe or something like that. It might be bigger than that. That's just a number I've pulled. Queensland, though, it's huge. It's massive. Like,
well, I'll give you an example, JJ. Let's just look at the reef itself and the reef footprint. The Great Barrier Reef is about 2,500 kilometres long. It's, in terms of the World Heritage Area, if we put it into something that Brits would understand, and by the way, although I run the English down, I do have a lot of English friends, and they're tolerable.
Tolerable. That's a word that we'll use.
With the exception of me.
Who is an interesting character in his own right. The Great Barrier Reef equates to about 70 million football pitches. We're talking about a very large, it's like 333,000 kilometres squared. It's big. Bigger than Malaysia, bigger than Germany, bigger than Japan. It's a big place, bigger than Italy. So the reef itself only covers about 70% of Queensland, maybe a little bit less, 70% of Queensland's coastline. So it's a big area, right? And actually it's much less than that. It's closer to 56 or something, because if you take the other side of the Cape into that. So yeah, I could understand why people from places like England or Scotland or anywhere in Europe travel outside of their own country. But we also, in Queensland itself, we've got like 4 different ecosystems, 5 if you include the marine space. And then if you go into the marine spaces, there are some kind of terrains that people will be able to access. So you leave southeast Queensland, you travel up to tropical North Queensland, or you can go inland to the Cape, to the Savannah tablelands. You can travel the world in Australia, in Queensland alone, because we're the size of many countries.
Without doubt, just so that people at home know, Australia during summertime has got 5 different time zones. Just keep that in mind. Five time zones. And by the way, one of them is South Australia, which is half an hour different to anywhere else. They've decided to make their time a half hour different than anywhere else, which is insane.
South Australia and the Northern Territory.
Northern Territory as well, yeah. We do the same.
Which makes a lot of sense if you just sit for a moment and ponder the Northern Territory. It's almost the size of Queensland by landmass, and it only has 230,000 people.
Nuts.
I found it mental. And obviously when I came to Australia, it's big. It's huge. But then knowing it's huge and experiencing the size of it is mind blowing. And I could not get my head around. And then a big thing for me was, this is where I've left home, and it's very cliche, but when you go traveling, you do change. I'm not the Dave I was when I left home. So when I went home for Christmas, the bushfires were happening. And the amount of land that the bushfires had wiped out was immense. And I remember going home, and I was speaking to some of my family friends, family members, and I was speaking to my partner's Elisa's family members, and that. They'd be like, "Oh, those bushfires are bad." I was like, "Yeah, do you know how bad they are? They couldn't conceive, they couldn't grasp how immense it was." I was like, "Yeah, nah, if you place that fire on top of England, London would have been wiped out." Which is it's shocking to know how many ecosystems or whatever would have been wiped out.
1 billion animals, man.
Yeah.
1 billion.
Yeah.
But there is something I'd like you to maybe shed light on, because and again, not from this country, but I'm still learning 4 years on, but is that the natural? Someone once told me that was the natural process to the Australian landscape. A lot of the trees have oils, and so therefore this has happened before humans even came along. It's not the fact that the bushfires are happening. That's a natural process. The problem is humans, because we've decided to colonize, and now we decide, oh, well, the bushfires are a problem for us. But is that correct?
Well, only some humans decided to colonise. Others choose to live harmoniously with other people, but we'll leave that to the side.
This is why I love you, Duane.
It's a good question, Dave. And actually, if you were to take the bushfires of southern Australia and place it on England, it would be much larger than the greater area of London. It was a very big space, and as JJ mentioned, close to 1 billion, if not more, animals were lost in those fires. So we could spend an entire episode on bushfire management. And yes, the Australian landscape naturally burns. We know that because of the oils, as you mentioned, in trees, things like eucalyptuses and pandanus. If you've ever seen a pandanus tree catch on fire, it combusts. It explodes, and all the leaves shoot everywhere and spread the fire quite quickly. But there's a few things to point out.
And they do that. They do that when the fire's still quite a way away, don't they?
Yeah. All it takes is a smaller spit, and it'll combust and shoot it further down. That's why it's spread, particularly in a good wind. But there's a few things to point out. Indigenous Australians, as I mentioned, have been isolated and living with some kind of formalised and complex relationship with the landscapes and areas that they kind of occupied. And in that, the use of fire as a tool to manage the landscape was critical for both ecosystem health and for the prosperity of those particular communities. And let me dive into that just quickly. In New South Wales, for example, the New South Wales state government many years ago made a decision to halt the practices of savanna burning. That is a practice where Indigenous hunters will go out, burn the underlying bushes underneath the major trees, seasonal and in a controlled manner, to move animals, firstly so that we can create a wall essentially that pushes all the kangaroo and whatever else into a region where the hunters could catch them much easier, but also by doing so created an opportunity for new sprout, and very often more native trees, and the grasses would burn out. Therefore, there was a management tool put in place. When you stop doing that, and the kind of the fuel load, that is grasses, small trees, shrubs that sit underneath the very large trees, build up. If you let them build up over decades, you're literally creating a pile of timber, putting fuel on it and saying, here's a match, which is what occurred not just in New South Wales, it occurred in Victoria. This doesn't occur in Northern Australia. So fire management systems, rangers who go out and conduct savanna burning activities still exist in the north, and they're quite regular. And in fact, being quite entrepreneurial, Indigenous ranger groups utilise that practice of savanna burning as a way of generating carbon credits because it has a positive carbon footprint. And then they sell those carbon credits to big businesses like Qantas and the banks and mining companies to offset their carbon emissions. So it's not only good for climate change mitigation, but it's also good for biodiversity management, and it creates a safer landscape for people to live in and around.
Just so full of insane amounts of knowledge. Like, I hope that anyone listening right now can hear the difference between when Dave, myself, and Isaac talk nonsense and when Duane speaks. It's a different league altogether.
I'm very good at talking nonsense as well.
You are
extremely good.
just for context, though, I remember when the fires in New South Wales started, and they were round about the Sydney area, and I could smell them from my house in the middle of Melbourne at the time. For context, everyone, that's the equivalent of Glasgow to London. 400 miles, and I could smell these fires. These weren't small. They were huge. And there was smoke that filled the air 400 miles away from where the fire was.
You can see them.
Yeah.
You can see places a big deal.
I remember coming back to the UK and being like, coming back to Australia. And I was saying to Elise, we might have to buy masks or something like that, because there was a lot of people talking about the smoke particles coming into Melbourne. You probably have to buy masks. And so we bought some, and they came in really handy 3 months later when the pandemic hit.
I'll tell you an interesting fact about bushfire management. Those systems have been used so consistently for such a long time in Northern Australia that there is a particular region where the eagles have mimicked the behaviours of Indigenous rangers or Black Indigenous communities when they do the fire management. So when the rangers are out, they start a line. Generally, it'll be a central point within a particular valley that they know that the fire is going to push out, causing a space for animals to get out of the way, but also easier for them to manage. What eagles have been doing in this particular place for thousands of years, so it's told, will fly down, pick up a stick that's on fire, pick it up, fly along and drop it further along the line to support the rangers in spreading the fire line, so that they can hunt small marsupials.
Wow. That's insane.
Crazy, right? And I anyone who wants to double check that, go ahead. You'll be intrigued to read about it. And I've seen it at play. It's absolutely incredible.
That's nuts. And you must have seen so much, though, Duane. You've told me some amazing stories about crocodiles that you tried to tell me 47 times in the one night. Yeah, that was a great story.
I've not heard this story. What is it? Tell me for the 48th time.
Well, which one? I mean, there's so many.
Well, touching on that, I was having this conversation the other day, quite literally, and I find it crazy with the animal kingdom, how what you've just talked about there, eagles picking up a stick on fire, taking it to set fire. I find it crazy how fish know where to go to reproduce, yet they've never been there in their lives. How birds know where to migrate to, yet they've never.
Turtles return to the same
sea, yeah.
Whales migrate the same paths, they pull up in this. Yeah, I mean, it's quite incredible.
Which kind of on that point brings us back full loop to my next thing that I don't really understand, and I know hopefully someone of your stature and knowledge can shed light on. Coral, the reproduction of coral. Now, I heard this fact not too long ago, and I don't know if I'm going to get this right, which blew my mind, that coral, is it correct that coral on the same day across the world will release its spores? Is that correct? No?
No. So
it's something about scientists can't figure it out or something. Coral does something very unique with their reproduction. They can't figure it out.
Yeah. So here's a fun fact for you. Coral spawning, the activity you're referring to, was first researched here on Magnetic Island in Jeffrey Bay. So that's a nice little fun fact for you by the Australian Institute of Marine Science many, many years ago. And for those of you who don't know who Australian Institute of Marine Science is, that's the leading marine research facility for Australia, a partner of the Marine Park Authority in the management of the reef. A very important partnership. We can talk further about that. But Dave, we don't fully understand what triggers coral spawning. There's a lot of things that it might be the change in seasons, the change in water temperature. They've got a watch and a calendar. I don't know, but they don't all start on the same day. It is a instant system. So spawn. Let's say coral spawn. A stadium. Someone starts a wave. The whole stadium follows suit in unison. That's essentially what happens.
Not if you're me. Hey, no one follows. It's because the one arm doesn't go up, and they're like, he's just having a stroke.
They're like, which direction is it starting? Oh, who knows? Go with the strong arm, which is very strong, by the way. Don't play mercy with it.
Oh, I haven't told you this yet. I don't think I've told you this yet, Dave. I'll keep the guy's name out of it. I dislocated someone's shoulder recently playing it.
That's ridiculous.
Actually,
I took it out of socket. Yeah. If anyone doesn't know what the game Mercy is, it's where you get your hand and put it into another person's hand, and you're allowed to do whatever you want with that hand to make them say the word mercy. I've never been beaten, and honestly, I don't think I ever will be.
Dave, while we're on coral,
back to the reef.
Yeah, sorry.
Dave, while we're on coral, I do want to. You made a comment earlier about the coral's not doing very well, or it looks unwell. That contrary to public opinion is not the case. So the long-term monitoring program for the Great Barrier Reef, which is run by AIMS, the guys that I spoke to you about, conduct surveys every couple of years to understand the impact. So if we look at the last 2 years, the recent survey, which was done 2020, 2021, they looked at, they took a sample of about 130 reefs. In most parts, in the north, for example, hard coral cover increased by about 27%, 26% in the middle, about 39% in the southern parts of the reef. Bleaching was on a gradual decline, and the severity of that bleaching was trending downwards as well. So, in fact, the reef is not dying at the rate that people think it is. It definitely is under pressure in some parts of the reef, but in other parts we're seeing an increase in coral.
And that itself will make people want to go. If that was me and someone said that to me, I'd go, prove it, take me out there. I want to see it.
Yeah. You pay for the trip.
That's the right skepticism to have, because at the end of the day, I am a representative of the Australian government. I do sit on government boards that manage the reef, but I am a traditional owner. I've got invested principal rights in the reef's health. If the reef declines or dies, my spiritual relationship and our people's spiritual relationship with that place also dies. So it is definitely something I'm passionate and serious about managing. And I'm not saying by any stretch that the reef is not at risk, because climate change is the biggest risk to the Great Barrier Reef. If water temperatures continue to rise, if acidification continues to rise, if sediment is increased inside the reef and crown-of-thorn starfish start blowing out of unnatural numbers, the reef is at real risk. But I think to simplify it too much and to say that it's unhealthy is probably the wrong and not very useful language.
It is fascinating. It's interesting speaking to someone like yourself, because your main source of information will be what you see on the TV or what you see on the internet, which again, what you've just said is more proof that whatever you watch on TV or whatever you read is not always necessarily the truth. What I'm fascinated to see is you were saying that they were taking samples and stuff like that. Was there any, because we saw these things during the lockdowns and all that, you saw dolphins returning to the Venice rivers in Italy and all that. Was there any sort of study shown that during the pandemics, and was it affected? Was there any sort of impact or anything like that or was it's that vast that it's negligible? But I can't even say
negligible. Yeah. There we go. I got you, mate.
Look, the next Great Barrier Reef Outlook report will probably capture those trends. It's hard for me to say because we haven't. Although there has been continuous surveys of different. By the way, the long-term reporting and monitoring of the Great Barrier Reef is a very big and complex machine. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it in the last 6 years, and we'll continue to spend a lot of money on it. But for me to be able to retain all that information is just not possible, and I don't have any of my notes here or any of my briefings, so I couldn't tell you. But I would suggest that the next Outlook report would probably indicate that there are different sections of the ecosystem that have done.
And when can we expect that to?
Well, probably towards the end of next year, I believe.
There you go. There's a scoop for everyone. A 3-schooner scoop.
There you go.
It just makes logical sense that a reduced presence of humans will provide an opportunity for the environment to thrive. And
humans are the worst. We're really bad.
However, but I would also say suggest that maybe the interactions with the reef has not declined because of COVID. People who live in kind of coastline towns, dwelling cities, who have a boat during COVID may have taken the opportunity whilst not working to interact with the reef. And I can say, without giving too much information, that the Marine Park Authority's compliance activities would suggest that the visitorship of the reef has increased, and with that, so have potentially the rate of breaches of the Marine Park Act and laws and regulations.
Oh, really? Not great.
Without saying too much. In other words, Dave, you'll get a bill soon.
Okay, excellent. And I have it, and I'm scared of the water. I'm getting a bill just for being on Magnetic Island. That's the fact. Which, coming back to Magnetic Island, it is a very beautiful island. It is not the largest island in Australia, as I earlier claimed, but it is a very beautiful island, as most. What was it like growing up on Magnetic Island for you? What is it?
Well, good question. I mean, let's just talk about the island for a second. The island's got 27 beaches. Most of those beaches have inshore reef. 80% of the island is a national park with walking tracks. We have a pretty high density of young backpackers for most of my teenage years. So horrible, really. Horrible backpackers. In all seriousness,
I have to deal with them when they're drunk, so I agree.
Well, I've never drunk it with backpackers, so I wouldn't know anything. Yeah. In all seriousness, the island was a reasonably safe, isolated place with a community that really looked out for each other and a whole bunch of kids whose parents were friends. So all of my mum's mates had children around the same age, and we would all hang out together. You could leave the house in the morning on Saturday morning, come back Sunday night. As long as your mother knew where you were sleeping, you were fine. It was a very safe place. But you also were kind of removed, sheltered from, social or fashionable trends that occurred in big cities. No one really gave a shit. The school brought in a shoe policy when I was in grade 7. Prior to that, you didn't really have to wear shoes or a hat.
How old are you in grade 7? Just to
12.
How old are you now, Duane?
23.
What?
Wait.
Is that actually how old you are? How old are you?
No, it's not. He hangs around with Ashley Nichols. He's older than me.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Dave. I'm actually Ash's carer.
Yeah. He needs a lot of care as well.
I'm 32, mate.
32. You've achieved a lot in your 32 years, mate. Just because we're running up to that hour mark now. And that's where we try and keep the podcast at, because, well, usually Isaac tells us that, but he's not here this week, so he can get to.
I mean, it's up to you if you want to carry on, but it is very.
I would prefer to do this again at another time, but we've mentioned one board that you're on. What are the other boards that you're on?
So there's two others that we haven't really spoken about. One of them is the Indigenous Advisory Committee. My function as the chair of that committee is to provide advice to the Federal Minister and the Federal Cabinet on the delivery of the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, and to ensure that Indigenous values are captured in the delivery of that act. That act looks at nearly everything you can think of when it comes to the protection of the environment. It's essentially the tool that the EPA would use in the UK or in the US. My function is to chair that committee and provide that advice to the Cabinet. The other, which is reasonably new, and it's an elected position, is as a councillor of the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. There are many equivalent examples in the UK. I don't know all of them off by heart, but in Australia there's a big organisation called CSIRO. CSIRO and the Australian Institute of Marine Science and AIMS are the three IATSIS are the three major research institutes. So IATSIS, the one in which I sit on, looks at ethical research, languages, culture, human remains, repatriation of remains. It's essentially...
Wait a minute. What do you mean by human remains?
Well, so the UK, in all their glory, and the US, actually, in the last kind of 100 years, the museums thought it was a good idea to take Indigenous remains away from Australia to place in museums in the UK and England.
Actual human remains.
Actual human.
Display. Are you joking? I didn't know that was a thing.
No, it's along with sacred and like artifacts and sacred tools and things that are of high cultural and spiritual significance to different communities in Australia. So IATSIS plays a function in advocating for the repatriation of those particular things to be returned to Australia.
And does that happen often? Do they repatriate them?
The culture of repatriation has changed. Museums are getting better. Private collections, however, are proving quite difficult.
There's private collections of human remains?
For sure, yeah.
What?
And artificial, like artifacts and items of high spiritual significance.
The dark
but
side.
It is getting better. We are having some success, and we have in the last few years returned quite important items back to Australia. An example would be, so last week here on Maggie we found skeletal remains.
Oh wow!
At Bidjara Bay, and the police determined via initial assessments that those remains were old, so therefore highly likely to be the skeletal remains of our ancestors. There was 5 bones all up. One of them was a skull, and there's a few ribs and a few other bones found on the beach because there's high tides, so there's erosion. Back in the day, the museums would have taken that, put it in the museum, and it would stay there, and they would make a decision about what they want to do with it. They'd either put it on exchange for something that they thought was more interesting from overseas, or
that's keep it messed up, man. Who is sitting in a museum deciding?
That is crazy. That
think about a mummy though. A mummy's the same thing, is it not?
There's just a business and showing. Yeah,
a mummy is the same thing, and it's I would always support whatever local or Indigenous communities who want their spiritual things back. If we were to go to, I don't know, somewhere in the UK and steal a particular old person's remains, I don't know, the former prince or someone like that, I think that the population would be quite upset with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
May he rest in peace.
Who?
The former prince.
Oh, who? Oh, yeah, one of them died recently. I don't care. I'm Scottish. Who cares? But that'd be the equivalent of you stealing, I don't know, William Wallace or something for me, I suppose.
Correct.
I mean, if you ever stole Meghan Markle. I don't think there'd be much complaint about that, to be honest.
I do not like Meghan Markle very much. She's also alive, Dave. What are you talking about?
I think the police would have something to say.
For how long, though? For how long?
How long? Oh, jeez, Louise.
You've just incriminated yourself. You go through with your plans now. It's all out there. Everyone knows.
To be honest,
I'm not even going to edit that out. That is 100% your own fault.
If Meghan Markle went missing, I don't think I'd be on the top of the hit list.
I think you might be now. I think there's going to be some algorithm out there when I upload this.
I'm texting guys with the AFB. He's got crap blonde frost tips, tattoos.
He looks like a pound, like a dollar store Zac Efron. You'll find them.
Missing Isaac. You've been a great addition. You've literally replaced Isaac perfectly. Jump on the bandwagon of Rip and Dave.
We're getting to the hour mark now. Duane, so we've asked you a few questions today, and you've said a few things. You've taught us a few things. If you had any advice to anyone coming to Australia for tourism that wants to learn more about your culture, how would they go about that?
The first thing is come with an open mind and an appetite to actively understand. If you want to learn more about a culture that spans tens of thousands of years, complex in nature but open in the way that we do business, then have a deep dive. Make some effort. Have a look online, go to tourism visitor centres, visit Indigenous-owned tourism operators. There are a lot of ways to do that, but the only way you're going to be able to absorb and truly understand is to come with an open mind and actively to seek it.
That is you're so eloquent. It's beautiful. Like, honestly, I love listening to you speak. You're an absolute delight. And honestly, one of the most thoughtful and lovely men I've ever met in my whole life. I'm very happy and proud to call you a friend, Duane.
And both of your checks are in the mail for the Are There Any Gentlemen's Left episode. Great exposure to me. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Isaac is the account payer, so we normally just forward things to him.
Okay.
We'll pass. And just send all your bills to him. He's not here to disagree, so I'm sure he'll agree.
As I said, Isaac's currently off on a little tour. He was in isolation due to being in a tier 1 site. Because of the isolation, it meant that he could travel because he'd been in isolation anyway. So he went up to where you two guys are. Wait a minute, I'm the only one stuck in this nonsense anymore. I've just realised that out of all of us.
Everyone, it's the free schooners live from Queensland. That's what it is now. The table is turned now. I always have to look back on Melbourne with envious eyes, but not now.
He's doing a little tour. He should be back around Christmas time. It's going to be quite a big one for him. Duane, when do you think you'll be back?
Good question, mate. I came up here for a board meeting the first week of June with a bag packed for 3 days. And I've been stuck here ever since. Stuck, by the way, on a tropical island in the Great Barrier Reef, as opposed to being in the rioting, COVID-ridden Melbourne, although you've still got better Uber Eats, and Uber Eats is a large part of my life as a diamond member of Uber Eats. So it won't be too long, mate.
Are you diamond already? That is outrageous. I miss Uber Eats.
I was on a boat today, guys. I went on a boat because now you're allowed, to have picnics and stuff, and essentially a little boat that goes up and down the Yarra.
I've seen those. They're great.
Yeah, we went up $100 it cost. Where you get on it for an hour.
Who went on it? Was it you and Yaz?
Yeah, just me and Yaz. You just drive it yourself. It was great. Couple of beers. I definitely wasn't drinking because I was the captain.
The skipper.
Skipper? I can't skip. I've only got the one foot that works. So the hopper, you can call me. But yeah, it's great. Also, absolutely shameless plug here as well. For anyone that is listening to this should come out 4 hours after we've recorded it. I've spent the last 7 days making a bit of music that is the most the strangest but most exciting thing I've ever done in my life. It's not an original thing. It's a mix. And the whole point of the mix is that no two genres are allowed to go with each other. It's 25 minutes long. There's over 50 artists in 25 minutes. It's a whole thing. It took me a lot of time, and it's going to be out on Friday. If anyone wants to listen to that, I'll post it on the Skinners page as well. It's not very often I do a plug like this. It's just, I put a ton of effort into this. Yes, Dave, have you got anything that you would like to say that you've got coming up?
Thank you very much, Duane, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Obviously, I know you personally, but this was the thing with past episodes. We got Ashley Nichols on, who you're good friends with as well, unfortunately.
Kira,
Kira. And it's fascinating getting people that you think you know on the show, because when you sit them down and do a formal interview and stuff like that, you really actually find out fascinating. Like, I already knew you were a fascinating bloke. That's why we wanted to get you on. But you find out a lot more. And I thank you very much for sharing everything you have done with us today. It's actually been amazing learning a lot more about you. My
pleasure, Dave. And something for other interviews to take away from this is drinking a margarita while an interview is a far more enjoyable way to do things. And I wonder if the drum will let me on the ABC with a margarita.
Yeah.
I shall give it my best shot. We'll see. I'll try and give the Three Schooners a plug.
We could get you on for another one. We could just get blind drunk and see where it goes.
So that's something I actually wanted to talk to you about. I want to do a special episode where we actually get drunk, very drunk, and I mean, like, we start drinking at 6 o'clock at night and we start recording at 9 o'clock at night. Like, episode. I want to do that. I want to be the Three Schooners.
We have had that one episode where we did get pretty drunk, and I started saying, getting confused between malaria and Malaysia.
Yeah, it got racist, didn't it, by accident?
Well, funnily enough, there's probably a lot of malaria in Malaysia. So
probably, yeah.
See, wasn't wrong. Thanks, Duane. Anyway,
don't back him up, Duane, for God's sake. I'm gonna have to change his name on Messenger and everything now for that. Well, Duane, thank you very much for being with us. You're, once again, I know I've said it already, but you're an absolutely fantastic person to know personally. And, another thing, are you still a single man, Duane?
I'm not commenting on my private life on this very public forum.
But if you were a single man, I would say, ladies, you've seen his face now. You've listened to him talk. What are you waiting for?
Also, you can get his Instagram link if you go to our Instagram page. Yeah, and I featured him on the story. A very sharp.
It's okay. We'll make an actual post so they can see him non-stop.
Are we gonna do it with love hearts?
Yeah, love hearts and everything. I know how that little zoom in thing that happens. Yeah, we'll do that as well. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Duane. You're an absolute god of a man. So you are. I love you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well,
I'll margarita you later.
That makes no sense, but okay. Well, it's a goodbye from me.
Just quickly also, if you are listening and you've loved this, we are getting more guests on. So we have a very cool guest. You'd love him, Duane, by the way. His name's James. He owns a bar in St Kilda called St Lucia. And
that's not even the same name as the place.
No, it's not. Anyway, he does excellent cocktails, and that's the person we're getting on next episode, hopefully as well.
Yeah, so we're doing an interesting thing, aren't we?
Yeah, you could give us margarita recipes because we're going to try and make a cocktail, and he's basically a mixologist, so we're going to try and make a cocktail.
Well, I know my limitations, Dave, and I'm more like inclined to take some advice from the guy whose profession.
We'll get you in. We'll get you in. We could be the
I'm
first.
I'm a professional skimmer of margaritas, but no.
Professional consumer. Okay, right. Well, it's a goodbye from me, guys. Thank you very much for listening.
And it is a goodbye from me. Thank you very much for listening. Duane, would you like to see us out?
It's a goodbye from me. Thank you very much for listening.
There you go.
Love you, Duane. Thanks for listening, guys. We will see you soon. Bye-bye.